You are listening to the Muslim Mind Collaborative podcast, understanding mental health services and experiences of Muslim communities in the UK.
Welcome to the first ever Muslim Mind Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Aliyah Abbas Hanif, a pharmaceutical medicine and cardiology doctor and academic. On today's show, we're marking World Refugee Day, and I have the absolute pleasure of introducing three distinguished guests. They'll be discussing their practice and experiences of caring for refugees and the learnings, triumphs, and challenges that they've faced. I'm going to pause before we do that and just take a moment to give a little background on the Muslim Mind Collaborative. The MMC aims to offer faith-sensitive approaches to mental health issues and the overall well-being of Muslims in the UK. It was set up in February of this year and has collaborative links with well-respected academia, policymakers, and charity sector. So back to today's episode and World Refugee Day. I'm personally really honoured to introduce our panel today, who come from charity, practice and beyond. So firstly, we've got Hanan Ashek, who is the founder and executive director of UK and Greece-based humanitarian charity Goodwill Caravan. Goodwill Caravan provides first-hand assistance to refugees at all stages of need. Secondly, we've got Angelina Yalonen, who heads up therapeutic services at the Refugee Council and has over 20 years of experience supporting refugees and asylum seekers. And finally, we have Nargis Kayumi, who's a social work practitioner and came to the UK in 2001 after fleeing the Taliban. She, like our other formidable female leaders, also wears many hats, including being an author, foster carer, and working with the charity My Family Group. So thank you to our panel. So lovely to have you here with us. Perhaps I will begin the conversation by asking you, what does World Refugee Day mean to you?
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to have me on this platform. So the World Refugee Day, when you mention that, what comes to my mind is strength, it's courage, it's resilience. These are the elements that we can identify that are from the refugee people who have come from persecution, people who have gone through a really dangerous journey to come to the UK or to the host country. And it's really that innate resilience that we want to celebrate, their strength and their courage. People who have been forced to flee their home country to escape conflict and persecution, and really to see them here as survivors and not victims. So we want to use this day really to celebrate them.
Thank you, Angelina. I think, Hanan, you wanted to comment, feel free.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me here today amongst these leaders in the refugee work and the humanitarian sector. World Refugee Day, to me, it's mostly about raising awareness. When I first started working in this field, it was around 7 years ago. I'm a psychologist, and I started volunteering with refugees, and then founded Goodwill Caravan. And the thing that I noticed over time is that, myself included, that there are misconceptions about refugees, the questions about why there are males in some of these boats that are coming. So many people don't understand that families send over their very young sons to stop them from being involved in wars, and not because they want them to come and cause problems in the country that they're coming to. So World Refugee Day, to me, is an opportunity to raise awareness about the people, the forced displacement, the fact that they don't want to be in Europe or far away from their home. There are so many refugees that spent quite a lot of time in Turkey and only left because they couldn't make ends meet on slave wages of $2 a day. So anti-trafficking and raising awareness, to answer your question.
Thanks, Hanan. Nargis, you want to jump in?
I would agree with what the wonderful ladies have commented there. I absolutely think it's a day of celebration, but equally just as much raising awareness, 100%. I think when it comes to support refugees through settling in and making this, whichever country they settle into their new home, and helping them to adjust, other people who equally are responsible in raising awareness and making the wider community aware of the issues, the challenges that a lot of refugees face, which I think many of us are blind to.
Thanks, guys. It's very interesting to hear. So I think from the snippets that we've just heard, it'd be really interesting to learn how you first fell into the fields that you're working in and how your individual journeys began with supporting refugees. And I know we've got Nargis there, and she's sitting in Turkey, so we've got a good connection at the moment. So maybe Nargis, you can tell us a little bit more about how you your journey. You fled the Taliban in 2001, so you're very young at that point. Could you talk a little bit more about that and your journey to supporting refugees in the many ways that you do?
Yes, so I fled Afghanistan back in 2001 with my family, so that would have made me around the age 8 going into 9. It was a very difficult journey, 100%. I think there are elements of that journey that I do recall, and some that still remain to be too traumatic to recall. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't fully recognize, that, you know, what you go through in the episodes that you experience throughout that journey that you take still very much remain with you. And I guess for me specifically, it has shaped me to be where I am today and to providing the support that I do as a foster carer to those seeking asylum, and also as a social worker.
I know that, you know, that journey must have been really hard for you, and as someone who's just an observer from afar, you know, we're watching the devastation that's occurring in Europe for the first time. I think it's really impacted many people in the UK on a direct level, where they're seeing people that look like them suffer. So, you know, it'd be really interesting to explore whether things have changed in the public's understanding of viewpoints of refugees with what we're seeing in Ukraine and the Russian invasion. Do you think things have changed on the ground with people's perceptions, Nargis and Hanan and Angelina?
Go on.
I think I must say that sadly that the perception of the public perhaps have changed in a positive, and it has taken you know, like what's happening, the adversities that's happening in Ukraine, the invasion, because that's happening in real time. And we are having to bear witness to the atrocity that's going on there. And, you know, and the social media, the news coming on TV every day. So it's really kind of, you know, coming close to home. While before that, the whole issue about the refugee journey was very much not very well received by the public. There has been lots of public discrimination and negative social media going on. So at the moment, I guess it has improved, but that doesn't mean that the systems that support refugees and asylum seekers has changed. Asylum seekers are really still struggling to gain their basic needs, their accommodation. The system that is in place is still very inhumane and degrading to asylum seekers. There's still a lot of work to be done. So yes, it's very, very mixed, but I must say that the whole Ukraine phenomenon is completely shifting the kind of the mind of the public. But there's still a lot of work that we need to do in terms of the service provision, and especially offering trauma-informed care and professionals having that cultural sensitive approach in how they respond to refugees and asylum seekers. There's still a lot of work we need to do, and this is an ongoing journey.
Hanan, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think this is a complicated one. We noticed, and by we, I mean the 40 organizations or so that are working on mainland Greece and the islands. These are international organizations mostly. We noticed that the funds that were being offered to help refugees in Greece were being sent specifically and restricted for Ukrainian refugees. And if you look at the statistics, I mean, there are reportedly now approximately 160,000 refugees in Greece as I speak. These numbers are seriously understated. 1 in 3 families that walk through our headquarters in Greece are not registered with the police. And we help them register. And so this number is at least 3 times that. That's what we know. And the percentage of Ukrainian refugees in Greece is negligible. It's around 15,000 Ukrainian refugees out of 160,000, and that's a minimal number. However, the majority of the funds that were being insistently sent, I have to say, I haven't seen this many philanthropists and donors ask if we need funds and specifically restrict them to Ukrainian refugees. So that was just a little bit sad to see, because us, and I think I speak for all of us, we don't work, humanitarian work in its essence does not work based on color, religion, or politics. We help anyone that is forcibly displaced or in need of help. So I feel that as much as what Angelina was saying is true, that there was this positive awareness about what a refugee is, the difference perhaps between a refugee and a migrant, a refugee forcibly displaced, a migrant closer to something like an economic migrant, someone who chooses to move from one place to another. So the awareness was raised. However, perhaps there may have been a slight preferential, a sense of preferential choice or treatment in who people wish to help. And that is in psychology. I mean, I come from a psychology background. It's understandable. Someone here mentioned earlier that it's happened to people that are very close to the borders of Europe or in Europe, for example, for the UK, close to the borders of Europe, and people who look very similar to them.
Yeah, so interesting comment there, Hanan. So I think every time we have a geopolitical change, the impact is very nuanced, and it depends on who you are, the impact that we see. So interesting to see. We heard from Nargis. Perhaps we can hear your story, Hanan, of how you started working with refugees and supporting their everything. With you is everything, mental health and everything with the refugees that you help. Maybe we can hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. My name is Hanan Ashag. Ashag is the verb to love in Arabic. I'm genetically and originally from the Middle East, from Libya and Egypt. I've lived most of my life in the UK. I am a psychologist. I'm also a researcher in genetics. And in 2015, I was in the second year of my PhD in brain repair and rehabilitation at UCL. And I was just watching TV. Honestly, that's what it comes down to, Alia. I was watching TV and I could see there were a reported 165 unaccompanied children that had gone missing in the Calais jungle. If you remember, there was a refugee camp, they called it the jungle. And I just told a couple of my friends that I need to go, it's too close not to go and help. I went out as a volunteer a couple of times. It was once a month or so. I have 3 young kids. They were much younger at the time. And I was working in the NHS also, training. And on the second trip, I think it was, I took an asylum lawyer out with me that was a friend of a friend. It was all very random. And I had these 2 children, 6 and 3, I think, Suha and Suleiman, Syrian Arab refugees that told me that their mother had died. And I asked them to show me where their mother was. And we went into this caravan where she was on the floor. And because I had a British passport, I believe, I was able to get the attention of the police and the ambulance at the front of the camp. They came in and said that she had a cardiac episode. And so after that, to answer your question, I couldn't not go back. For the first year, I interpreted for Citizens UK, founded Goodwill Caravan. This was 2015, 2016. And then Aylan Kurdi, the 3-year-old boy, the image that shook the world. I'm sure everyone here knows about the death of this little boy from Afghanistan whose family was trying to get to Canada, were having complications, and the father watched every child of his drown in the Aegean Sea, which is between Turkey and Greece, to try and reach safety in Europe. And this boy was the last child that was struggling to breathe, and his body ended up that image that was taken by a police officer in, I believe it was someone from police in Turkey, on the shores of Izmir. And it was that image. I just told my husband, listen, I either fundraise for my second year of my PhD, find funding for that, or I'm going to go with this Goodwill Caravan thing and let's see how it goes. And ever since we've helped over 170,000 refugees and beneficiaries. So it's a journey still.
Yeah, Hanan, it's evident that you've literally given your whole life to supporting refugees, and it's highly commendable. I mean, there's little praise that can be showered on you from me. I mean, I think we're all astonished at what you've done and what you've achieved. So thank you. Maybe now moving back to Angelina. Angelina, can you describe your story and your journey, and how you kind of got involved with refugees? I know you've been at the Refugee Council for several years, and you've got decades of experience in this field. You've written policies, you've written books on this topic. So how did it all start for you?
So for me, I've always been kind of passionate in making a positive difference and helping other people. But initially, because of where I was and my knowledge of what helping entailed, I started off as an advisor, and I just thought, all these people come in, I need to help them to kind of maybe fill in the forms to apply for accommodation, give them food, give them clothes, and and just engage with their practical and basic needs. And as I continued doing that work, I realized that there was something missing, and most people were not happy. There was sadness in their eyes, really sharp sadness you could read, and a lot of low moods, and not quite engaging with the practical needs. Even though you get them accommodation, house, you could still feel a heaviness between them. And so I got interested in understanding what is it that the emotional needs that they were experiencing as refugees. And that's how I started my career journey in studying more about refugees, and going on to be a therapist and a supervisor. And I decided to specialize in refugee trauma. And so that was me equipped in my knowledge. And so then in Refugee Council, I joined in the therapeutic services, where then I could design programs, because through my learning, I came to understand that the Western kind of approach of counseling was quite could be different to what the refugees' needs were, and the understanding of mental health. So I kind of developed some curiosity in how we understand mental health symptoms, and how most people from refugee backgrounds understand mental health symptoms. And clearly there was a mismatch in many of them. They didn't have the terminology. Western, we were more fixed in diagnosing symptoms, while rather with refugees, it was more about narrative. It was more about explaining through the body how they were feeling, rather than having symptoms, and that together with the stigma attached to the mental health and well-being, really became a challenge to most refugees. It is a challenge even today to most refugees to access the mainstream mental health service. And so I started to develop a cultural sensitive therapeutic service that was more focused to the needs of refugees, that kind of appreciated their cultural understanding, that really appreciated more about their interpretation, not working with pathologizing systems, but rather working with the narrative. So if somebody was just feeling a heaviness, or or perhaps they're feeling like they are running, the issues of nightmares has been a kind of a challenge to us, because while we could understand the impact of trauma and the impact on the body for refugees, it's more can be of a story, which can be attached to ancestral beliefs, their religious beliefs. So you see, there were so many kind of mismatches that were playing on. And so that kind of created my curiosity in really seeing, what is it? How can we respond to this particular client group? And so really it meant that I needed to understand their background, their journey, and not working with perhaps the early patterns of relating the dysfunctional patterns, like, perhaps referring to my learning in the Western culture, but more about adversity, what the impact of adversity to refugees' mental health in relation to their cultural beliefs. So we saw women who perhaps have experienced domestic abuse in their country, while that was not very significant to them because of the way they understand domestic violence, but rather it had more of an impact through their maybe if they had gone trafficking, or through their asylum seeking journey. So it's really focusing on working on the client's narrative. And so we've designed this framework that we work with. It's called the therapeutic care model in Refugee Council, which really lays more weight on the three foundations, which is the therapeutic relationship, the bearing witness, and psychoeducation. And there's a lot there and then we've written a book towards that effect. And it's really kind of focused to the refugee trauma, the multiple level of their complexities that we respond with.
Such an interesting journey, Angelina, as with our other two ladies. So incredible to hear. It seems like one of the things that unifies this group on the panel is everybody's sense of compassion and a need to do something, go beyond, which is incredible to hear. And one of the things that I've heard from your story, Nargis and Hanan, is basic needs for asylum seekers and refugees appear to have been met to some degree, somewhat of a degree, whether it be, in Turkey, in Calais, in the UK, basic physical needs are being probably met to some level. One of the things that I do want to touch upon is I've seen the prevalence of common mental disorders such as depression, anxiety, and PTSD, quoted as ranging from 22% all the way out to 80% in refugees and asylum seekers. I was wondering if you guys could add a little bit more meat on the bones for that context. It's such a wide number. It's incredible to see publications citing such a broad range. I wanted to understand what's your experience of this and what kind of levels of these mental illnesses are you seeing now with your service users?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I must say the mental health of refugees and asylum seekers is really huge. And it is increasing. Now, part of it is because of the loss and the separation they've experienced from their country. The second part is the journey that they have made, which is really a dangerous journey. There's another client who was hijacked along the way and taken to a forced factory where he was stuck there for 2 years doing shoes, in a factory shoe factory. And he was stuck there for 2 years before he was released. So these are the risks that refugees take along the journey, because if you imagine in any country you pass through, you have got no rights and you're not accounted. So whatever happens there, we have seen a woman we worked with from Pakistan who fled with her daughter who was 14 years old. And along the journey, when they were waiting for one of the trucks to take them through, because it happens at night with the people smugglers, the woman was pushed through in a truck and the truck was shut and the daughter was left behind. So you can imagine how distraught that woman was when she came to our service. She had lost her daughter along the journey. I mean, there's so many stories. Then arriving in UK, you'd think that things now are okay, but actually that's when another journey starts, a survival journey, because applying for asylum at the Home Office is so complex. You're then stuck in a hotel or a hostel for months, unsuitable accommodation. There's complaints about the food is not suitable. And, there's just so many limited choices that you have. Again, that is another challenge, access to health services. We've worked with a woman from Congo who was bleeding for a long time. And when she then got her health services, the GP recommended that she needed a surgery for her fibroids. Her religious belief kicked in. She believed that those were children sent from God, and so she refused the surgery. So again, there was that, challenge. How do we then convince her to have this surgery? And she was like, it's okay for her to bleed, but if she's having fibroid, because the doctor showed her the scan, but she had never understood that anything else could grow in her stomach apart from children. And so she was holding on to that belief. So again, really often that psychoeducation, kind of sharing good information. So there's so many things that come into play, not just internal factors, but external factors. And that's the difference. And when you look at what is available in the mainstream, they've got the IAP services, the community mental health team, the community mental health team. Sometimes what they offer, our clients don't fit in because they don't tick off those boxes. because they need some clear symptoms that they can label. And sometimes the IELTS service, which is 6 sessions, does not really fit in with this whole psychosocial aspect that the client is presenting with, because clients present with multiple layers of needs, and they all need to be joined up, connected, not working on a standalone. And that is the challenge that the clients present to the system, and the way the system here, the mainstream system, is designed to respond to them. And so because of that, organizations like our organizations come in to kind of fill in that gap. But we also struggle with our funding issues, and there's a limited capacity. So it's a really ongoing struggle. And for asylum seekers, the fear is real. They are always living on a fear of deportation, fear of destitution, fear of detention. It's real. We're not working on a paranoia or it's really working on that. So it's a very kind of a sensitive area that we always have to work with. But what we offer is really that stabilization, mindfulness. That's the kind of interventions we try to bring to help the clients to self-regulate so that they're able to cope on a day-to-day basis.
What an incredible line, a succinct way to summarize mental health for refugees and the challenges that they face. The fear is real. So it seems that at every single stage of their journey, pre-migration, migration, and then here in the UK, the fear is always there. It maybe just changes in terms of what it's towards, but the fear is always there. An incredible way to kind of it hasn't quite sunk in to me that people are living their lives like this for years and years, and once one set of challenges is finished, another starts. Angelina, there's a couple of things that I definitely want to circle back that you mentioned, particularly the example that you gave in terms of the woman who had fibroids. As a doctor, I really want to come back to that and also understand from the panel whether education of healthcare professionals and doctors and nurses in the UK is adequate. So maybe we can touch base on that in a little while. I just want to move over to Nargis now, actually, and bring the same question to you, Nargis. What I'm interested in learning is the prevalence of mental disorders in refugees is so broad, quoted at 20% to 80%. It's a huge number. Is that what you're seeing? Are you seeing mental health illnesses in refugees at the 20% level or the 80% level? What does it look like to you on the ground as someone who's supporting refugees?
So I'll start from my understanding in terms of working in the social care field and working alongside my family group. What we've recognised is that a lot of the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who enter the UK, the figures around that is anecdotal. It isn't quite there concrete in terms of through research and practice. I'm not sure how much knowledge you guys have as panel members about social care, but social care local authorities are all segregated. They don't all work in sync. And so, and not all local authorities record a young person's faith on their system and where they have fled from. And so in order to grasp those sort of figures, to give a better understanding, a broader understanding of what unaccompanied asylum-seeking children's needs are, it's very difficult to grasp. And it's very difficult to understand. And I think, you mentioned there that the basic needs of unaccompanied asylum-seeking people are being met. And I would argue from a social care perspective that it's their basic needs that aren't being met, which is impacting vastly on their mental health. And it's the impact of not being treated as similar to that of their peers or any other child in care that impacts them feeling isolated from a society that they thought would welcome them but hasn't, and a system that is there to support young people and still doesn't. And I think it's I think it's a combination of not knowing how to support, but equally have the elements of biasness existing amongst professionals, amongst social workers, unfortunately, amongst health professionals. And that's the reality of it. And how do you record that? You don't. You experience that. And the many ways that I experience that is as a social worker, but equally as a foster carer, when I'm taking young people to GP practice to make a need known, or a health assessment of a young person, and just the communication exchange between the health professional and the young person, you know, how that's segregated and how that's authoritarian, and the imbalance of power dynamic that exists between those interactions. It's quite surreal to see, but it does exist. And I think that's the bit that we miss out. And that's the bit that I think greatly impacts young people's mental health, especially unaccompanied asylum-seeking people's mental health.
So Nargis, a follow-up question. Have you seen any, I'm gonna use a positive word, I hope. Have you seen any improvement to things from your own lived experience and now to the care that you're offering children? Have you seen any improvement or any changes in the way that, you know, provisions, mental health and physical needs are provided in the UK?
I think what I'd probably comment to that is saying that people are willing to learn, and with having the right people in a room, and being able to exemplify someone's lived experience kind of brings to light some of the challenges that people go through, and it kind of brings into play the rawness of the emotions that someone goes through, and it brings back the realness to that person, especially when you're able to conduct that face to face. And I think with our virtual way of working, that's really being sort of really missed out on. And I think when we are able to bring those people at the front line to almost tell us their story, it really does allow others to. It brings the humanness out in everyone in the room, and I think that's what's missing currently, and we need to bring that back.
I agree with you there, Nargis, 100%. I think for me, on a personal level, and my personal perceptions of mental illness with refugees, I only learned that when I went and worked in a refugee camp in Turkey and Jordan. Only there did I see that, you know, we had lots and lots of people presenting to my cardiology clinics with just weird and wonderful symptoms. They were nothing to do with their heart. Their heart was fine, but all the symptoms that they had were physical manifestations of the trauma that they were going through. And how do you handle that? I had no training for that at all. You know, never read it in a paper, never read it in a publication, a book, textbook. I never had, you know, a doctor talk to me about it. So I think I definitely agree with you know, lived experience and getting that narrative out there and hearing that from different healthcare professionals and colleagues is so essential. And we really need to improve the way and the mannerisms that we have with refugees, and have a bit more compassion, to be honest.
Yes,
go ahead, Angela.
I think it's quite common to experience refugees presenting with somatic symptoms and symptoms that, you know, unexplained symptoms, which perhaps sometimes are not related to any medical diagnosis. And again, as you say, that is really to do with how the body experience, because we experience trauma through just internalizing images, internalizing the sense of air, you know, just the whole atmosphere. And we can also internalize that collective trauma that you may not be able to completely identify that you have gone through a trauma, but it can be just through the whole journey and the whole change or shift of your culture that can also give you that shock in the body. And sometimes it's really difficult to treat that. For us, I think it's really about offering that space where people can share the narrative and us bearing witness, and just validating, and acknowledging that, it has been difficult, and helping refugees to connect with activities, to connect with their communities, really helping them to re-engage with themselves.
So Angelina, with the story that you mentioned with the lady who had heavy menstrual bleeding due to fibroids.
Yeah, I think in this case, what our learning was is when refugees go to see doctors, and this is a general statement, obviously the GP or the health service will see them like anybody else from the mainstream, not distinguishing whether you come from a refugee background or you've been here 20 years or you're British. And I think that sense, that kind of sometimes that you can miss out some of these kind of aspects. I remember a woman who went to see a GP, and because the GP was a man, and the woman entered the clinic, and the doctor quite roughly and very politely told her to close the door behind her, and the lady collapsed. She just turned back to close the door, and she collapsed. So that was an automated response, because the fact that she's been told to close the door and there's a man, whatever she picked up from that, whether it is the mannerism of the air or being in a room with a man, so something else was evoked that kind of then reacted very.
Yeah. Are there faith or culturally sensitive approaches that should be applied in some of these examples that you've given? For example, the fibroid case, or this lady who, had taken issues. How do we, apply those approaches to make these situations better?
So there's a cultural sensitive approach. However, I think we can also look at having a trauma-informed practice that really takes account that, an assumption that everybody has experienced trauma, and for us to be more sensitive as professionals, how we come across to the other person, so that we are not creating a situation to kind of re-traumatize the client. So that's something that we can work on.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because that woman obviously felt trapped, shutting the door, what that might have brought back to her. I'm going to move quickly to Nargis, because we're actually running out of time, which I can't believe it's gone so quickly. But Nargis, you wanted to say something?
I just quickly wanted to add and say that often the physiological presentation that unaccompanied asylum-seeking children present also is a reflection of that. I think within certain cultures there is still an element of taboo in terms of experiencing mental health, and there's a vast, huge stigma associated to that. And I think what we sometimes often forget is that they are describing physiological aspects because they haven't got an understanding of mental health. And whilst in the British culture we are accepting of what mental health means, how to be mindful and how to look after your own well-being, that doesn't exist in other countries. I think how we can improve practice is to make ourselves aware of what other cultures look like and what it means to other people, in order to address some of the mental health challenges that people experience, and actually introduce to them that this is an aspect of this society that we accept, and you are welcome to be open and honest about how you feel, because we recognize that and we appreciate that what you've gone through isn't an easy journey. And I think it's that narrative that is currently missing. I think we often expect people are able to communicate that across, but actually some people don't have the language to, they don't have the understanding to, and it isn't because they don't want to, it's because they haven't been wired to think like that and to communicate like that.
Great point, Nargis. Hanan?
I wanted to add to what Nargis and Angelina were talking about with regards to these statistics for PTSD and mental health issues that refugees have. A lot of it has to do with culture. We found over the past 7 years, perhaps the 30% mark, this statistic that seems to be in a lot of the literature, might be linked to male refugees and asylum seekers because of the shame that's linked to a lot of the cultures from where refugees are fleeing from, like Syria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, and Yemen, Palestine, and other countries. And what we've seen from our experience, the social workers that work with us, the psychologists, is that it's closer to 90%, but for women and children. But they don't know how to, what the ladies were saying, they don't know how to articulate what's happening with them. I can't sleep, I don't know why. I keep worrying that my children are going to disappear, I don't know why. And what you were talking about earlier, Aliyah, I believe, that they've been in this situation of forced displacement in refugee camps, places that aren't safe. They've needed to be on guard. They used to have normal lives before these wars started. And coming back to what Angelina and Nargis were saying, that when they do settle, whether it's in the UK or whether it's in Europe, going back to a normality is almost something that they can't remember anymore. We've got quite a few women, I mean, Goodwill Caravan run legal medical shelter aid distribution, and we've got a women and children's shelter, and in that shelter, there are quite a few women over the years that have been fleeing not only war with their children, but fleeing honor killings. Because they moved from one border to another with a cousin or a brother or whoever, it's not always a male, and offered up to trafficking gangs because they ran out of gold and money. And then by the time they reach the borders of Europe, the male with them or the responsible older lady with them will mark them as a shameful character that dishonored the family or the tribe. And these women come running to organizations like Goodwill Caravan in Greece, for example, saying, please help me, they're going to kill me. And a lot of the time, like Angelina said, they might have only one kidney and have been victims of sexual assault. So the statistics on PTSD may not be precise.
Incredible to hear. You know, it seems like we're applying Western standards to people whose disease it just doesn't fit. You know, they've got completely different symptoms, they've got completely different things going on, but we're trying to, you know, smudge everything onto our traditional models, which is probably not the right thing to do. I just want to move the conversation on a little bit and get a little bit of an understanding from you guys on what your experiences have been over the last 2 and a bit years with COVID-19. How has that impacted the way you look after refugees, and how has that impacted their mental health? Hanan, maybe you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. COVID-19, it's a little bit strange. When the pandemic started, we all thought it was over for us. And there were actually 28, I believe, to date, organizations in Greece that shut down. However, the donations were coming in initially. I don't know if that's the experience of Nargis and Angelina. In the beginning of the pandemic, I believe people felt more of a sense of, and this was in the news also, of togetherness. We're in this together. And so the donations were not as much. However, they were still there, the support, maybe not as much the awareness. The second year of the pandemic was a whole different ballgame. I think that other than refugee fatigue, the Ukraine thing happened later on. People were tired of hearing bad news, it seems. Again, this is just articles that I've read and just observations in the news. And it really did hit hard. I was reading articles about the Charity Commission in the UK and how organizations are shutting down like a domino effect. And so that was our experience with COVID-19 now in Greece, and I'll summarize. There were a lot of law changes almost every 3 months for NGOs, but also for refugees and asylum seekers. It was a lot harder to maintain the work that we were doing. The laws changed a lot, and refugee camps were being cleared because Greece didn't have enough funds to keep them. So that was our experience.
And are things improving now, Hanan?
I want to say yes. I'd like to add that there are thousands of children and vulnerable people that have died at the hands of pushbacks from Greece. We find that there are groups of people in charge in different border crossings, the islands, for example, and the Evros River on the border of Turkey and Greece, the land border. That doesn't necessarily reflect how the Greek government themselves feel, because we've met quite a few people from municipalities, and there are quite a lot of people that appear to want to help. I don't want to get into politics here, and I wouldn't do that. However, there are groups of police, and there are different people in every country in the world that perhaps might be from right-wing groups. One of the largest right-wing groups in Greece is the Golden Dawn. We've had our building graffitied quite a few times, and our glass is smashed probably once every few months for helping refugees. And I bring this back to awareness, that they're not aware why these people are coming to a country that was already under austerity when this war started.
Yeah. Should we circle to Nargis? Nargis, any comments on your opinions in terms of COVID-19 and how the pandemic's affected the service users and the foster children that you support?
I think what it's definitely made us feel in terms of, as an organisation, my family group, that we've very much lost a sense of community practice, and we've had to do more of the on the ground work ourselves, purely because a lot of unaccompanied asylum seeking young people and families don't have access to internet, and if they do, they don't have the means to access the various virtual ways of working that we've learned to very quickly adapt to. And I think that one-to-one work has continued throughout the pandemic. And, you know, what we've recognised as my family group is, because of the anecdotal data that is there, and having no hard sort of understanding or concrete evidence of what Muslim young people's mental health looks like, unaccompanied young people's mental health looks like within the social care field. Mm-hmm. We've initiated a new subgroup to my family group called the Muslim Youth Link, in an attempt to create an online platform through an app to connect young people to our service and to make them aware of the various activities that may be going on in their local area, as well as giving them access to a mental health practitioner and an imam should they wish to seek any advice. Because what I've noticed from one-to-one work with Muslim unaccompanied young people is that their faith holds them strong in maintaining what path they feel they've got to now navigate through sort of finding their feet in the UK. And in going with that faith, I think that's what we recognise with Muslim Youth Link, is that our young people need access to those services, and they need access to services that understands, respects their cultural beliefs, their identity, but equally can allow them and enable them to connect to a new way of life, and show them the ropes of how to do that whilst maintaining their dignity and their cultural heritage and their where they are from, keeping those roots alive. Yeah.
Thank you, Nargis.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got only a few minutes left, and I just wanted I actually wanted to ask a quick question, so perhaps I can just ask this question to one of you, maybe Angelina. Angelina, as a member of the Refugee Council, we're living in a time where we have a cost of living crisis, where things are challenging for everyone, where the government has a shoestring budget for everything. What steps can be taken to ensure policymakers invest in the issues that you have all been describing? And you've got literally a minute or two to tell me the answer.
Oh, thank you. I think it's just ongoing, as Hannah said, raising awareness, banging on that door, and really getting together as organizations, having those network forums where we can actually identify the issues, present case studies, so that really kind of highlight the issues and also maybe provide training to other professions. But we really just have to continue obviously drawing motivation and drawing inspiration from the refugees themselves, who really have demonstrated significant resilience, and also really appreciating that refugees, if they are well supported, they contribute to the society. They do contribute to the economy. We've had a number of doctors, for example, we've got a doctors program in Refugee Council, where actually after offering them that psychosocial support and a good network, they've been able to reclaim their professions and they're working in NHS. So we needed to highlight that refugees are not here to take, but they're actually here to also improve on the economy and enhance the work that we are doing in the society. They come with diverse skills, for example, and celebrate those successes. So I think it's just an ongoing work that we need to keep saying this, yes.
Thank you, Angelina.
Yes.
Thank you, Angelina. So I'm going to bring the podcast to an end now, and I'm just going to actually put one line in there, which is an amalgamation of many lines that you ladies have said, which is faith holds refugees strong. It helps them navigate the constant challenges and fears that they face. So, I mean, incredible to speak to you all, and I really hope that we can join again at another date in another podcast. But thank you so much for being part of the first Muslim Mind Collaborative podcast. Thank you again.
You have been listening to the Muslim Mind Collaborative podcast. For more information, please visit bcbn.org.uk.